croeso to Wrexham News. It's a bit different this week because we're trying Teams, which means that we can speak to people right across Cymru. So we're speaking to Leanne Wood, who is in the Rhondda. Everybody will know Leanne, obviously, as the former leader of Plaid Cymru. And I think, Leanne, you were a Senate member for 18 years. So you were there?
I was. I was, yes. I was elected in, I was going to say I was elected in 2003, which seems like a lifetime ago now, doesn't it?
I think to raise from the off, obviously you're not involved. I say you're not involved in frontline politics anymore as a politician, but actually you've probably got one of the liveliest Facebook pages, I think, of any politician in Wales, is one way of putting it. So you're in an interesting place at the moment in terms of how you balance that. I know there was an article in the Western Mail, wasn't there, recently, where they talked to you about that issue. So I don't know if you've got anything you want to start us off with in terms of what life is like outside of frontline politics, but then still dealing with it pretty much full time anyway?
Well, I don't really differentiate between politics and party politics and elected politics. It's all politics, isn't it? And doing politics outside of elected politics isn't really any different to doing politics as a frontline politician. It's just using different platforms, using different coalitions of people, and I think essentially trying to achieve the same thing, really. And so I don't see that, even though I'm not a Senate member anymore or the leader of a political party or a councillor, I still see myself as active in politics. And that has never changed. That was the case before I was an elected politician, before I was a councillor, when I was in student politics. And since I've not been involved in elected politics, I've carried on being very politically active and outspoken. And I've just used the voice that I got in a different way. I mean, I've built up a platform outside of elected politics. And so I feel a responsibility, really, to try to use that platform to carry on with the things I wanted to achieve all my life, which at this point now is from the grassroots up rather than from the position of the Senate chamber.
And how does that look in practical terms then? You're obviously you're outside of the Senate now, but you're very much engaged with community activity in the energy sector. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Well, my job now is with Community Energy Wales, and I work part-time with Community Energy Wales, and we are a membership body for all of the organisations throughout the country that are creating, generating, conserving energy and using the surpluses from that energy to do good works and community building activities. And we've got some fantastic projects right throughout the country. And my feeling is that if we could replicate some of those successes in every community, then what we're essentially building is real independence, because once you're no longer reliant upon the state or corporations for the money that comes into your community for regeneration and economic activity, then you're in a stronger position to take decisions for yourself. You're in a position to decide how profits are spent, and you're in a position then to overcome decisions that politicians and governments make, like, for example, through austerity, where cutbacks, we've lost, libraries, youth services, day centres for older people, and so on. Well, if communities are able to make their own surpluses and their own profits, they can reinvest back in those kind of facilities, and it's happening. And where it's happening, it's fantastic and it's exciting. And I just want to try and do what I can to help more of it happen. And we're hoping that the next Government of Wales will be facilitating of this kind of activity. And if we have government support and local government support as well to promote this kind of activity, then I think the world is our oyster. I really do.
I think just to and I'm going off back onto Facebook and social media as a discussion point really, because I think as a woman in politics at the moment, it can be difficult online. And again, back to your Facebook page, it's very busy. It's very difficult to manage. I would think sometimes looking at through some of the comments that you get on there, and I know I've got talking to other women in politics at the moment who are finding social media a difficult place to be. And we're seeing sites like Senedd Waste and others that are really targeting um, women in Plaid, women in politics generally. Would you have any advice for those people now looking at how you navigate that? Because it's getting more and more toxic, isn't it?
I think you've got to poke fun of it, really, and just laugh at it because it's pathetic, isn't it? Let's be honest. The, the attempts to discredit, the things that are said to diminish and to put down, especially women, but it happens outside to everybody, doesn't it? If you're a loony lefty or you're a Plaid, LIBOR, whatever, these terms, we see them all the time. And sometimes I just think, look, guys, you just look like a bunch of idiots. You keep making fools of yourselves. You're not really selling your politics to sensible people. Okay, maybe the non-sensible people will buy a bit of it, but it's ridiculous. And I think in the real world, most people outside of these echo chambers are just laughing at it and not taking it seriously at all. And the Caerphilly by-election was a case in point on this. The noise and the traffic on my Facebook page in the days leading up to the by-election, it was as if reform were taking over the world. And it was as if everybody who was commenting on anything online was backing that party. Well, when you went out onto the streets and you spoke to people on their doorsteps, the conversations were completely different, completely different. Immigration hardly came up. If it did, you could have a sensible conversation about it, not at all in the same way as you can online in many cases. So I think we got to keep a bit of perspective on this, right? I think we got to recognize that there are forces putting a lot of money into trying to change the narrative and create a lot of haze running and to discredit and undermine and ridicule and make especially women look stupid. And we have to turn that around. They are the stupid ones. They are being took, they look took, and we have to treat them as a bunch of pups, I think.
I mean, yeah, it is an echo chamber, and it is easy to forget that sometimes, isn't it? Because sometimes some of these posts are getting hundreds of comments, people piling in. I'm sure they're shared somewhere, and people are advised to go in and comment and things. But there are some repercussions. As lazy as some of the lines are, the LIBOR one is I always find that quite amusing. But then you do have the other lines. Plaid are the same as Labour. We're getting that a lot. And it's lazy politics. It's an easy line a throwaway line to use, but actually, the situation in terms of the Senedd and the fact that it was built to be more cooperative is much more nuanced, actually. And the problem with these short slogans and lines is it's difficult to have that nuanced conversation with people, isn't it? And you were there from very early on in terms of the establishment of the Senedd. What is your view on how cooperative politics work in the Senedd system as it was set up in the first place?
Well, if you think of the chamber in the Senedd, it was built as a circle. And the reason for that was that the theory was that the debate wouldn't be as adversarial as the Westminster Parliament, where there's two bunches of people shouting at each other. you can't hear what's going on half the time. And it's built and designed for that adversarial politics. Whereas if you created a circular chamber, then that would be more conducive to people really debating, having genuine discussions, respect for each other, and finding ways to cooperate. So the design of the chamber was deliberate. And the design of the original settlement was deliberate as well. It was originally designed so that no single party could have overall control. And in the time of devolution, it's been very difficult for the governing party on occasions because they haven't had a majority, and they have had to rely on other parties to get things through, like the budget, legislation, and any other sort of policy decisions that they've needed to get through. And of course, that's forced cooperation, and that's happened with different parties with different agendas. And I think it's more than lazy, this lumping together of Plaid Cymru and Labour, because anybody who's paid any attention to the debates in the Senedd over the years will see quite clearly they're very different parties, come from very different political traditions, and the objectives of both the parties are, okay, there may be some crossovers on a socialist perspective, but now Labour are in government in Westminster, any of those sorts of ways of working and thinking are diminishing anyway. So the independence question is the obvious big dividing line, and the way in which Labour politicians over the years have talked about those of us who favour independence will show very clearly that they're very different parties. But here's why I think it's more than lazy. I think it's deliberate and strategic for the right and the far right to lump the parties together, because that enables them to say, we are the alternative to Labour. Well, the only people who are saying this, again, are the same people who are filling up the Facebook pages with utter rubbish. Out in the real world, on the streets of Caerphilly, people could see very clearly the difference between Plaid Cymru and Labour, and saw Plaid Cymru as a very clear alternative to Labour. And I think that's where we're going to be again in May. So we just have to rubbish the claims. We have to rubbish the claims. It's lazy. It's strategic. They want you to think like that. But, as recent polls have shown, people are not buying this bull, are they?
It does strike you that the laziness, when you look at the grassroots, whether it's the Rhondda, Wrexham, or Caerphilly, Labour has faced Plaid as a consistent opposition, hasn't it? We have been the people exposing Labour's shortcomings on the ground. I think that's true in the Senedd as well, to be honest with you. And we've only helped them out to make sure that Wales succeeds, whether it's with free school meals or getting budgets passed. So I think that's important for people to understand, and I think they do. And on the other side, of course, you've got Reform trying to say that they're the uh, anti-establishment party, when in fact they're shipping in Tory establishment politicians like nobody's business. And, Labour and Tory have been the tag teams. They've been the tag team in Wales. When Labour was in opposition, they were banging on about HS2 consequentials. Once they got into power, they forgot about that. And the Tories, once they were in opposition in Westminster, they were banging on about HS2 consequentials. It's just a tag team. They see it as a game, I think, and to what extent we can make sure that people understand that Reform are actually no different to that tag team. I don't know how different you see Reform as a challenge to the other unionist parties.
Well, I think they're very different, and I think they're seen very differently as well. So we've got Labour and the Conservatives. I think many people now are seeing both of those parties as having had a fair crack at the whip, failed, and it's time for something different. So then the question is, what is that something different? And there are a range of alternatives, aren't there? Um, and many people seem to believe at the moment from the polling that Plaid Cymru is the best alternative defeat um, to defeat reform. Reform, I think, are different players in all of this. They don't see governance is about governing. It's about changing narratives. It's about whipping up emotions. It's about trying to get hold of the levers of power so that more money can be funneled to your friends, your mates, and the millionaires and the billionaires and the tech giants of this world, despite trying to pretend, I'm the ordinary guy down the pub. It's all a charade. Nothing they do or say can be taken at face value. So you're not dealing with um, uh, you're not dealing with a normal set of circumstances then. And therefore, I don't think it matters really to people, their core base of support, how badly reform are running councils in England, for example. I don't think it matters a jot. They expect politicians to do bad things. I mean, look at what's happening in the United States with Donald Trump. He was, in his first term, appalling. And then when he lost his election, his behaviour was terrible. And then people voted him in for a second term. So it just goes to show that the backers of this kind of politics want the chaos. They want they don't mind. They're not bothered about councils going to rack and ruin. In fact, the harder these things, crack up, the better in a way, because it's about disruption and it's about causing chaos. So I do think we're dealing with a different kettle of fish with the far right. And that's why I think everybody really who can see them for who they are need to work together to make sure that they don't get their hands on power. Because we can see from the United States, especially with a second term, how bad this can get, At what point do we call that regime fascist?
It smells like it, doesn't it? It looks like it and it walks like it. It is horrendous.
And it's painting a clear picture for us when you open the door to fascism, what you get. We can see that playing out, can't we? Um, I'm wondering, with reform and the impact that they may have on the Senedd, they will win seats. We can see that in terms of the polling. Whether you were there in 2016 when UKIP were there, the sort of, what would you call them, the pre-runners to reform, I suppose, in some ways.
The
Uh,
grandfather, and then the Brexit Party is the father.
yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Generational, I don't know. But yeah, it's all the same thing, isn't it? It's all the same party, just failed, reformed, re-established with Company's House, off to go again. Same people. And now they're having Tories all landed in as well.
How chaotic was it with UKIP though? Because we could potentially be seeing that sort of dynamic again in the Senate. I think there's serious issues in terms of what some reform politicians are saying in terms of devolution and abolishing the Senate as well. But in terms of the dynamic that may be there post May with a group of reform politicians, what was your experience of working with UKIP? Because that might give us an interesting insight, I think.
Okay, well, they were small in number and they didn't really know what they were doing. So the ability for them to cause absolute chaos was limited. So I do think with a second term and having learned the lessons of the first term, much like Donald Trump, they will go in with more plans to cause more chaos. And they'll probably have, bigger numbers as well. It's a PR system pure now. And so the percentage of votes they get will be reflected in the percentage of seats overall that they get. So we can expect there to be a fairly sizable block, even if they're not in a position to form a government, and let's hope that they aren't. Um, I don't think they'll take their work very seriously. They won't be diligent committee members. They won't be diligent scrutinisers. They'll use the platform for the ways in which they can dog whistle and spread the poison and raise the temperature and the emotions of their base. And so that's what I think will happen. And it'll be very frustrating for people who are not of that mind to sit there and listen to it and remain calm and composed. And that's the big challenge, really, because they're beating emotions. That's what they want. They want those reactions, and you know, the more they get them, the more they'll feed off them. So, I think you probably, you know, we'd all need to bear that in mind. I think in the way we respond to their antics, because it will be performative, it will be planned, and it will be strategic, and they will have their eye very much on 4 years down the line and thinking about how they can then become the biggest party. And of course, they'll be the real prize for them is Westminster, isn't it? So um, there's that too, that dimension to factor into things, isn't it?
It strikes you as actually Wales is, it's not even a stepping stone, is it? They see Wales as a bit of a test. They can test out some ideas in Wales, but I don't even think they want to run Wales, because I think if you had 3 years of Reform running Wales, nobody's going to vote for them in 2029 for the UK elections then, I think. You know, because I think they would be shown up to be as incoherent and insensible as they are in a lot of the councils so far. But yeah, this is all about Farage into number 10, as far as I can see, and they want to
They're
use
not
that platform.
interested. They're
You're
not
right.
interested in Wales, really, are they?
No.
It is, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because I see now we've got a long view of things. I see Brexit being the experiment that prepared the way for Trump to become elected. And they used a lot of the message techniques and the learning and Cambridge Analytica and all of that stuff. And, you know, people like Steve Bannon involved in all of that. I mean, I'm sure a lot of learning was applied to that Trump election in 2016. And in the same vein, then the learning from this election in Wales, and to a lesser extent probably in Scotland, because um, of the different circumstances in Scotland and the different history, and having had an independence referendum already. But they will be looking to learn lessons from these elections to apply to the next Westminster election. We've seen, haven't we? We've had a mail shot to every home. You know, that's really expensive to do that. Well, that's about learning. What they get back is what they're going to learn from. So I very much hope lots of people send their blank envelopes in, because that should be something to learn as well.
For me as well, though, it's how can we make the most of the Senedd election, whatever happens post Senedd election. It looks like Plaid will be in a better place than it is now. Hopefully, we're in a position to actually change direction in terms of where the Senedd is taking Wales. Do you see opportunities?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I spent 2 years sitting on a commission which looked at the powers of the Senedd and how we related to Westminster, and we gave quite some consideration to the question of independence through that process. And it's been quite frustrating because that report has sat on a shelf since it was completed, and there was a lot of good measures in there that, were they implemented, I think would make a big difference to people's lives, because governance would improve markedly. I'm encouraged. I've not seen the Plaid Cymru manifesto yet, but I'm encouraged by what I've heard in terms of taking the recommendations from that report forward and implementing them. And also, I'm encouraged by the paper that was produced on the economy, making Wales work. I think being able to focus on ownership and community ownership, as I talked about earlier on, and thinking about the concept of cymunedoli, which Sel Williams from Blaenau Ffestiniog and the whole Bro Ffestiniog movement has sparked a much wider movement that I hope we can grow throughout Wales, and having a government in place that recognises the value of strong communities and investing in good communities, and the question of ownership, and talking about things like the Crown Estates and who owns the land and the seabed, and those questions of exploitation and extraction. I think having, if we are able to have a government that understands how we ended up in the economic position that we did as a country, then we've got a really good chance of having measures to get us out of that situation. And so I do have great hope. In fact, I can't think of many other places we can find hope at this point now. Things are looking pretty grim, right? So really, for me, the strengths are all in our communities. That's where it is all happening. And so we all have to just roll up our sleeves now and do what we can to give communities the ability to be resilient and independent, and to do what they can as much as they can for themselves. Because Wales is a community of communities, and if we've got strong individual communities, then we've got a strong country, haven't we? And I think if a Plaid Cymru future government can go into government with that very much at the forefront of their minds, then after 4 years, it doesn't take huge budgets to achieve quite a lot with this. We could end up in quite a different position economically and community wise. And of course, from a climate change perspective, we do need to take that whole question a lot more seriously than it's been taken so far as well. And all of this agenda lends itself to working on the green side of things as well. So yes, I am very hopeful, and I'm more hopeful now than I've been in quite some time, actually, because the thought of a far-right government in Wales, um, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it?
No, it doesn't. I mean, I'd add things like maybe to what you just said, child poverty, a new focus on actually tackling these issues. So there's the new child payment in line with the Scottish model, isn't there? Otherwise, we were talking about this the other day. We're looking at having the highest rate in the UK of child poverty by 2029 if something's not done. Labour have scrapped the targets, haven't they? That renewed focus and energy towards finding solutions, however difficult these issues might be, is desperately needed. And Labour just have, I'd say they ran out of it at least a decade ago. Uh,
Mm.
and it's just been decline, isn't it?
I think there's got to be recognition this stuff is hard, isn't it?
Mm.
Tackling poverty, child poverty, is part of adult poverty. Tackling poverty is difficult. And without the tools, without the control of the benefit system, without the ability to really shape the economy, then actually properly making a dent in child poverty is going to be really, really difficult. So, you know, we can put sticking plasters, and we can bring in measures that can help ease the pressures at different points for people. And that's what a government has the potential to do in Wales, I think. But we also have to recognise that longer term economic changes are necessary to really tackle the causes of poverty, and that has to be done at the same time. And that's why community wealth building and tackling at the grassroots is so, so important, because unless we think now about where we want our communities to be in 20 years' time, we're still going to be arguing about benefits and handouts and dependence for people, when we want to be able to tackle child poverty by giving people the means to be able to resolve their own poverty. We don't want people to be dependent, do we? We want people to be independent. So there are measures that can be introduced to help alleviate the worst pressures of poverty, and governments should do what they can on that front. But we do have to tackle the causes of poverty. And with AI coming down the road, we looking at a very different way of work, the relationship between work, people, and income. AI is going to be replacing lots of the jobs that exist at the moment. How are people going to pay their bills and mortgages without income from work? So we'll need to be thinking about things like universal income and other ways of enabling people to live. But if we don't address some of these measures, the poverty problem is going to get worse. So having a government that is prepared to consider the measures that can alleviate poverty in the short term, but also to change the economic circumstances over the long term is essential. And that's what gives me hope for the future.
I think one of the best lines I remember you saying when you were leader of the party was, "This isn't as good as it gets." And I think that that needs to be our mantra for the next Senedd term, having that positive focus and looking at what the future can be. And that really sums it up for me.
We all know that it can be better than this, no doubt about it. So, yeah, I'm lying.
Time to give people a bit of hope. Diolch yn fawr, Leanne.